Okay.
Okay. So tonight's climate reality seminar will be presented by Bill DeVincenzi and Marn-Yee. Bill will be the primary speaker for tonight. The title for the seminar is The Climate Crisis, the Problems and the Solutions. Incidentally, our timing for tonight's climate seminar couldn't have been better planned. As momentarily the entire world's attention is focused on the concept of global warming, unfortunately though for the world, it has very short attention span when it comes to the climate issues. As an Assyrian club, also relevant to us is the rise and fall of Assyrian Empire. A study of climate scientists at California State University shows that the most significant catalyst contributing to the fall of Assyrian Empire could have been climate change. The theory is that 2 centuries of high precipitation, which had led to unsustainable growth, were then followed by a long decades of drought, which had led to the weakening of the empire and consequently its fall. Regardless of the Assyrian Empire timeline, many of our ancestors' achievements and innovations remain to be part of the everyday life today. Some have even been credited to others. For now, though, we face different kind of issues. Our relatively small population, about 4 million, is literally scattered across the 4 corners of the world. As one of the earliest converts to Christianity, we have since adopted many ethno-religious groups within the Christianity, which have contributed some more to our divisions. As though that wasn't enough, the most recent hyper-politics of misinformation has split us into 2 distinct halves that each side finds it hard to see eye to eye with the other half. Our role in the Assyrian Democrats of the Bay Area is to bring clarity to the confusion created by the politicians and media. We are here to learn and pass on our knowledge along the way, bring recognition to our people, promote progressive values such as democracy, equality, and social racial justice through education, participation, and advocacy. Empower Assyrian American political voices, advance and protect the interests of Assyrian Americans, identify and support suitable candidates for elective offices, provide a forum for communicating progressive ideas in the Assyrian community. So that is us, Bill, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Walter, and thanks for that nice introduction to your organization, to the history. I mean, it really, I'm always amazed at how much we don't know
right.
around the rest of the cultures.
Too.
Yeah, so it's nice to hear. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I will just go ahead and get started. So I will be doing most of the talking here. My associate, Marn-Yee Lee, she's going to be monitoring the chat, and we'll be answering questions as we go along. And then, you know, there'll be a chance for more Q&A afterwards. So if you have something pressing, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. Otherwise, I'll take all your questions later. So just a little bit about myself. So my background, I've been in corporate finance for 28 years, and then I thought I retired, but then I got bored. And so I started teaching at San Jose State and launched a 27-year career teaching. I retired again and then found out that I was very, very poor about retiring. You know, I just couldn't handle it. So I got involved in climate reality. I was trained in 2018 by Al Gore and the group. I now am part of the Silicon Valley chapter speakers bureau, as is Marn-Yee. I'm also vice president treasurer of Elders Action Network and the Elders Climate Action, which is where I got involved in the climate, you know, both as far as the training and as far as actually doing something with Elders Climate Action. As if I wasn't busy enough, I decided to found a Sustainable Villages Club here. We live in the villages in San Jose, and that has been a very successful endeavor. We've got about 70 people in the organization, and people who really want to do something for the environment. And again, liking to keep busy. I took on a job as faculty in residence for sustainability at San Jose State University. I've been doing this for 7 months. Supposedly it's a part-time job, 20 hours a week, but you know how that works with part-time jobs that seem to develop into full-time jobs. So quite busy, but doing stuff that I really love doing. The ground rules for this talk, real quick. There's no politics here. To me, it's a moral and humanitarian issue, and I've done my own research. I vet my sources. So what I present to you, hopefully, is the best scientific information available at this time. And why do I do this? Well, I'm concerned about the future. I'm concerned about the future that I'm leaving for my children, for my grandchildren, for all future generations and all life. So I'm going to break the topic down tonight into 3 pieces. The first part is going to be, do we have to change? The second part is, can we? Do we have the ability to do so? And then the third, and maybe the most important, is, will we? So first of all, the first topic is climate change real? Is it really a problem? Well, let's talk about the science behind climate change for just a second. So this is a picture of the Earth taken from one of our space stations, and this is showing the sun rising. And the blue that you see there is our atmosphere. And that's about a 5-mile thick layer of atmosphere. But when you think about the fact that it's covering a 25,000 mile in circumference ball, that's extremely paper thin. So the problem, in a nutshell, is the sun, which has been doing this for 4.5 billion years now, sends light waves down to Earth. It passes through that atmosphere and warms the Earth. Okay. A lot of that radiation, or a lot of that light, those light rays, heat rays, are absorbed by the Earth and continue to warm it. Some of that is radiated back into space. That's why you see these beautiful pictures of Earth from space glowing. It's that radiated light waves that are going back up into space that go back up through the atmosphere. However, some of those light rays are being trapped by the atmosphere and keeping the Earth warm. Okay, so this is kind of the process that's been going on for millions of years. Okay, what's happened recently is that we've been putting huge 162 million tons of man-made pollution into that atmosphere every 24 hours. Okay, so we're putting huge amounts of pollution up there. So what's happened, you notice that blue line there, you may have not noticed, just got thicker. Okay, which is causing more and more of the heat to be trapped. So now we have a real greenhouse effect going on. And of course, the thicker that layer of greenhouse gas, the warmer the planet is. You can think of it like a blanket, right? Covering the Earth. And the thicker the blanket, the warmer the Earth is going to be. And all the greenhouse gases that we are putting up into that atmosphere right now are causing that blanket to get a lot thicker, and of course, the Earth to get a lot warmer. So there's your global warming 101. So where's all that coming from? So the largest source of global warming is the burning of fossil fuel. You notice that this chart starts right at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And you can see that as the Industrial Revolution takes off, more and more fossil fuel is being burned. And of course, ever since the end of World War II, it's just gone crazy in terms of how much fossil fuel we've been burning and how much carbon dioxide is being put up into the atmosphere. Where is that all coming from? So this graphic kind of shows you the different sources, from industry to coal mining to permafrost thawing, which I'll talk about later, coal plants, oil production. Transportation is probably 40% of it. Agriculture, of course, forest fires, all of those things put greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere. So you say, okay, we have a bunch of CO2 in the atmosphere. Haven't we always had CO2 in the atmosphere? And the answer is yeah. If you look back over the last 800,000 years, and I choose that because that's kind of the time where we evolved and all the plants and animals that evolved with us. And it's been pretty consistent over most of that period of time, between 200 and 300 million, 200 and 300 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, until you get to the Industrial Revolution, and all of a sudden this thing just spikes. And so people who say this is a natural phenomenon, just have them look at this chart, because that's not natural, okay? That is totally human caused by the burning of fossil fuels. In fact, if you extend this chart up to 2021 today, we're at 417 parts per million. So we're kind of right up here somewhere. So it's continuing to go up. So you say, okay, so there's a bunch of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So what? Well, this chart shows the carbon dioxide in blue here, and right below it, we put the temperature of the Earth. Notice the startling correlation between these two charts. For every spike in CO2, you see a spike in the temperature of the planet, and the trough's the same. And it goes for 800,000 years until today, okay? And the only difference between these two charts, you notice there's a slight time differential here between the peak in the CO2 and the peak in the climate. So there's that little bit of timing that we have working for us right now, because right now we see that the temperature is kind of fluctuating, spiking up a little bit. And so the question now, and of course, there's no way in heck, we would survive as a species if the temperature got that hot. It would just roast everything, it would kill everything. So we can't let that happen. And we have a little bit of time to work with, but we don't really know how much this time gap is. Is it 100 years? Is it 1,000 years? I don't know. So are we seeing any evidence of it happening? Well, 19 of the 20 hottest years on record ever have occurred since 2001. So yeah, we are seeing evidence. And in fact, the 5 hottest years of all have been in the last 5 years. And if you throw 2020 in there, it's going to be actually hotter than 2016. So it'll be the hottest year ever. So this isn't getting any better. It's obviously getting a lot worse. And we're seeing a lot of evidence of global warming. So where's all that heat going? Well, actually about 93% of it is trapped in the ocean. The ocean is a great absorber of those light rays. And so you say, okay, well, so what effect is that having? Well, it has a huge effect. And let's take hurricanes as an example. Warmer oceans lead to more intense hurricanes. Colder water tends to short circuit a hurricane, slow it down. Hot water or warmer water feeds it, okay? So you end up getting more intense hurricanes. You end up getting hurricanes that intensify much more rapidly. So there's not as much warning as you might normally get. Because of the warmer temperatures, there's more moisture in there, so you have heavier precipitation. And because sea level rise, you get higher inroads from the storm surges. And lastly, the storms tend to stay in place longer. And Hurricane Harvey was a great example of this, that hit Texas in 2017 and dropped 50 inches of rain in 5 days. Now, San Jose, we got all of 6 inches of rain the whole year last year. They got 50 inches of rain in 5 days because of this hurricane. Okay, so, and that's becoming very typical. In fact, in 2020, it was a record year for hurricanes, 30 named storms. The average is like 12. So a named storm is a significant storm. They're not all necessarily hurricanes. But we had 7 Category 3 hurricanes or higher hit landfall, which is a record. There's so many weather events that we ran out of alphabet. We had to start using the Greek alphabet. The alarming part about this was, and we talked about it, rapid intensification. Delta intensified from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane in 30 hours. And the problem with that is people don't have time to react. You think, oh, there's a tropical storm out there. 30 hours later, you're being slammed by a Category 4 hurricane. So, this is a problem. This is a problem. In fact, the last 2 hurricanes of the year, Eta and Iota, a Category 4 and Category 5 hurricane, respectively, hit the country of Nicaragua 2 weeks apart, same area. And they're still recovering from that, or trying to. Hotter years have more fires too. You see this little graphic that shows for the hotter years, there are significantly more fires. And if this was extended out to 2021, 2020, this chart would go, they'd have to redo the chart, okay, because there were so many fires in 2020. And we recall probably the worst ever was the Camp Fire that destroyed the town of Paradise in 2018, that left a lot of people dead. But 2020 was the worst year ever, in terms of fires. If you look at this particular chart, the largest ever was the August complex, followed by the SCU, which was right behind us here, the Creek Fire, the LNU fire in Napa, the North Complex. Those are all 2020, and those are all 6 of the top 8 fires that ever happened in California. In 2020, we had over 4 million acres burned, okay? Previous record was 1.7. So that's a huge increase. Now, fortunately, 2021 hasn't been as bad in terms of the number of fires, but we did have the 2nd largest fire ever, the Dixie Fire. You don't see the Tahoe fire here because it's not as big as these, okay, in terms of acres burned, but it was also a very significant fire in 2021. So fires are happening. Now, this is a picture I took. I actually caught a lightning strike. And this is right out behind my house, looking up into the hills, and in exactly the direction where that SCU fire started. So who knows? Maybe that's the lightning bolt. It's not just California, folks. It's worldwide with these extreme weather catastrophes. We see from 1980 through 2020, the last 40 years, there's just a constant increase in the number of extreme weather events, and it's still going on. Some people ask, well, okay, we understand the heat part of this, global warming, but how do we get these extreme cold temperatures? Yes, global warming does cause extreme cold temperatures, and in 2018 was a great example where the temperatures at the North Pole were 50 degrees higher than normal. And you say, well, how'd that happen? Well, there was some extreme heat in Siberia, and it pushed north, and so it warmed, the air north of it, and it interacted with the polar vortex. And the polar vortex is just, it is just a stream of cold air that just kind of circles around the North Pole, right, when it's behaving itself. But when that hot air hit it, it caused it to split. And here's a graph that kind of shows you how that happened. You see the red, that hot air coming up from Asia, hitting the North Pole and causing the extreme cold air to split into the northern part of the US and into Europe, Northern Europe. The impact was in Chicago, for example, the boardwalk along Lake Michigan totally froze over. The temperatures dropped to minus 22 degrees, minus 50 with the wind chill. My niece lives there, and she said they couldn't go out the house for 3 days because it hurt their lungs to breathe. It was so cold. If you ever eaten a cold ice cream and you're something real cold, and that's what they were feeling, just breathing out there. And just update 2021. So yes, Europe had the same issue. 2021, a new vortex split caused that extreme cold that we heard about in Texas, where they were having a real problem down there with all their equipment going out, and that was again the same impact, same type of impact. Sea level rise is also a result of this, with the melting of the ice caps and the glaciers and what have you. And in fact, if you were reading about the COP26, there was a number of Pacific Island nations that were just, begging, the rest of the world to stop, the heating, because their islands are being inundated by the seawater. Here we see that New York and Miami are among the 2 top 3 cities in the world that are at risk because they're both very, very flat. In fact, today in Miami Beach, every high tide floods downtown Miami Beach. So it's getting worse, folks. It's getting worse. Another statistic that we don't see very often, if at all, is that worldwide about 9 million people die from air pollution. Now that's horrible. And we don't hear about it because mostly it's third world countries, it's China, it's India. We don't see it a lot here. But this is a staggering number. It's way far worse than the pandemic. So, but this is happening. Around the Bay Area in 2020, mainly because of all the fires, we had 51 spare the air days. That set a new record. So, even though we didn't, well, we did have the fires close by, I shouldn't say that, but we've all experienced bad air, even from fires that are way up in the north. And not in the least bit of an issue is the species extinction. We're now risking losing up to 50% of all land-based species in this century. The scientists are likening this to the extinction of the dinosaurs. When the temperatures plummeted in that case. In this case, the temperatures are rising. We can turn up the air conditioning, but these guys can't. They die. So it's a problem, and it's a collective problem. So when I talk about my concern about future generations and all life, I mean all life. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a warning back in October of 2018. And basically what they did in this case, they've been doing this every 6 years for the last 30 years. People don't pay any attention to them, unfortunately. But this one compared a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase to a 2.0 degree Celsius since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, roughly 1880. Their conclusions, and I can't get all the details, but they said, hey, if 1.5 is serious, 2.0 is a lot more serious. Now, to put that into context, right now, all the things I've been showing you in the prior slides are due to a 1.1 degree increase in temperature worldwide. Okay, so even as we're trying to limit global warming to 1.5, it's still worse than what we have right now. And if we allow it to go to 2.0 degrees Celsius, it's going to be significantly worse. So, and then the other conclusion they reached was they thought, oh, we have time until 2050 to get things fixed. Well, no, they now increased that and said, no, it's 2030. 2030 is the time where we have left to make something significant happen to avoid this catastrophe. And that's less than 9 years from now. So we need to take action now. So you might say, well, gee, we're talking about 0.5 degree Celsius. Why is that so important? I mean, what's the big deal? Well, think about it this way. If you have just a tad colder than 32 degrees Fahrenheit, you have ice. If it's a tad warmer than 32 degrees Fahrenheit, you got water. So there's your tipping point. So it doesn't take a huge difference in temperature to go from ice to water. And in fact, what's happening with global warming is that the temperatures are moving further and further and further north. The temperatures are getting warmer and more ice is melting. And that's where we're seeing this problem. Actually, the United States made its own assessment. And in this around the same time as the IPCC report came out, and they concluded, 1, global warming is real, and 2, human activity is the dominant driver. Now, this was at a time when the presidential administration was denying that climate change even existed, okay? And yet here's our own national climate assessment, our own scientists saying, hey, it's real, and and we got to do something about it. So let me talk a little bit real quick about, well, okay, what are some of the impacts that we see right now due to global warming? And I want to talk about some feedback loops and tipping points that are threatening. So again, a feedback loop is kind of like, you can understand that there's a circular events that happen. One leads to the other, which leads to another, which leads to another, and you have the spiral effect. And at some point, they can become self-perpetuating and spiral out of control, at which point you have what I call a tipping point, where you can't go back. It's extremely difficult to reverse. So let's look at some of these. I'm going to look at 3. So the first one is the albedo effect. Now, there's about a dozen of these, but let's look at the worst 3 as far as I'm concerned. So the albedo effect is basically the ability of the Earth to reflect sunlight. So ice and snow, anything white, reflects that sunlight back. So like 85% gets reflected back into space. So that keeps the planet cool. The ocean, as I showed you earlier, absorbs 93% of the heat from the sunlight. So the ocean is a great absorber. So guess what's happening as sea ice melts and as snow melts and as glaciers melt? We're losing all of that reflectivity and turning it into the thing that absorbs heat the most? The ocean, okay? So the best reflector suddenly becomes the greatest absorber in this case. So the feedback loop, and they're all very similar. You burn more fossil fuel, that puts more CO2 into the atmosphere. The planet gets warmer, the sea ice melts, it exposes more ocean, ocean absorbs more heat, that causes more sea ice to melt. And hopefully you can see this loop just spiraling worse and worse, okay? Ice around the world has decreased by 75% in the last 40 years. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of glaciers that have disappeared and the Arctic unfreezing for the first time ever the last couple of years. So that's serious. And so we're looking at a 40% loss in reflectivity. So that means that 40% of that heat that used to be reflected out into space is now staying here and warming the planet even further. And once the sea ice melts, it's gone. It'll take another ice age to recreate it. Permafrost, way back, millions of years back, when there used to be a lot of foliage up in the north, and then the last ice age covered it with ice. And so you had a lot of biological matter that was, trapped in what they call permafrost. That permafrost is now starting to melt. And as the permafrost melts, it exposes that organic matter, which begins to decay. And when it decays, it releases methane. Methane is 80 times more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. So, and there's enough methane to cause some really, really serious problems. So again, we have a feedback loop where we burn more fossil fuel, more CO2 goes up in the atmosphere, the planet warms, permafrost melts, releases methane, which makes the planet even warmer, and more permafrost melts, and on and on. Here, scientists are projecting that we can reach a tipping point at the year 2030 where this goes out of control and all of the permafrost melts, in which case we would have an extremely serious problem. Lastly, I'll talk about forests. Forests are nature's way of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's a good thing. They inhale CO2 and they thrive on CO2, okay? And as a benefit, they exhale oxygen. So forest trees are the best thing in the world for controlling our atmosphere. But we have a problem, and it's called deforestation and fires. So when we deforest or when we have fires, there's not as many trees to absorb CO2, and in fact, a decaying forest releases all that CO2 that it's been absorbing back into the atmosphere. So here we go again, a feedback loop. You burn more fossil fuel, more greenhouse gases, you get a warmer, drier planet, you get more drought, more fires, where trees die, less CO2 is absorbed, more CO2 is released, and you get more global warming, on and on. So again, another one of these feedback loops that are dangerous. We are close to a tipping point. Rainforest Action Network is projecting that the Amazon rainforest could turn in the next 10 years from being an absorber of CO2 to an emitter of CO2. Now, the Amazon rainforest is the largest rainforest on the planet. Now, is there a solution? Yeah, there's a solution. Cut greenhouse gas emissions. All right, stop deforestation and regreen the earth, or in other words, plant more trees. And we need to figure out a way to not only stop putting more CO2 up there, but we got to figure out a way to pull some of that CO2 back down, because you saw the charts on how much CO2 we have up there. And CO2 doesn't come back down for hundreds of thousands of years. The only good news about methane is it only has a life of 1 to 200 years, so it will come back down. But this isn't rocket science. We have the technology. We just need the will to do it. So is it real and is it a problem? Yes. And do we need to change? Absolutely. So let's talk about, can we? Do we have the ability to change? And the answer is yes. It's called clean, renewable energy. So I'm going to ask you a question and hold your answer, because I'll answer it for you later. But what is currently, right now today, the lowest cost alternative for electric energy? Is it nuclear? Is it coal? Is it natural gas? Or is it wind and solar? So hold your answer, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and we'll come back to it. All right, let's talk about wind. So on this chart, you see that the capacity for wind has increased dramatically in the last 10 years, albeit that this is a very tiny portion of the energy requirements on the planet. Still, the direction is a good one. And you say, well, okay, well, why is this? Why are we able to do that? Well, because here I am. I'm a former finance guy and a finance professor. I like to look at charts that show costs going down, and so you see a reduction in the cost year after year, which has made installing all these wind turbines a lot cheaper and more economical. So that's what's happening in wind. There's enough wind globally to provide worldwide electricity consumption 40 times over. So there's plenty of wind out there. How about solar? So you see an even more dramatic increase in solar installations in the last 10 years. And you say, okay, how did that happen? How are we able to do that? Same reason, only even more dramatic, is the reduction in the cost of solar cell modules. From what used to be almost $80 a watt is now down to 20 cents a watt. So fabulous reduction in costs and continuing to go down. So why don't we see that reflected in the marketplace? Well, take a look at global energy subsidies. You see that renewables are subsidized to the tune of 143 billion, and you say, well, that's pretty good. But fossil fuels are being subsidized to the tune of 5.3 trillion, or 37 times as much. Here's the problem, and here's something that when we have an opportunity to vote, to end global energy subsidies, we have to do it. Because we have to put things, because when you look at the levelized cost, if you get rid of the subsidies and you look at the levelized cost of energy, nuclear is by far the most expensive, followed by coal, followed by gas, which is now replacing coal because it's cheaper, and followed by renewables, which are cheaper than gas. So the answer to my quiz is for renewable energy is currently the cheapest, even though it doesn't show up in the marketplace because of the subsidies. But this is something that we all need to keep in mind. Enough solar energy reaches the Earth every hour to supply the world's energy needs for a year. So there is a prodigious amount of solar energy out there for us to make use of. So the question then always comes up, what happens when the sun don't shine and the wind don't blow? And the answer is yes, we need to establish storage capacity. All right, we need to establish storage capacity. So you see on this chart that in 2021, the storage capacity is pretty low here. And the projection, and this is Bloomberg Energy, projecting that this increase is going to be extremely dramatic over the next 20 years. And again, you can ask the question, well, how is that going to happen? Well, look at the prices again. I look at cost. The cost of lithium-ion batteries has decreased 90% in the last 10 years. And I predict that that's going to continue to do so. And why? Because if you look at the money being invested in energy, and you see twice as much being invested in renewables right now versus fossil fuel, 4 times as much by 2025, and 6 times as much by 2030. So you see where the investment money is going, and that's going to drive the cost of those batteries down, and it's going to hopefully result in the ability to use solar and wind a lot more efficiently. Businesses, automobile manufacturers, every automobile manufacturer in the world has an electric car either in production or online, so inline. So we're seeing a huge move there by, in fact, General Motors has just come out and said, hey, they're going to phase out fossil fuel powered cars and light trucks by 2035. And I'm like, wow, that's huge. And why are they doing it? Not because they are afraid of what's going on the planet. It's cost savings. The electric cars have fewer parts and fewer workers required. It's also just happens to be the fastest growing segment of the automobile industry. They're no dummies. They're saying, hey, we see what's coming and we're going to change. I think what's really truly remarkable is this last one. They are claiming to become carbon neutral by 2025. That's only like 3.5 years from now. So that is incredible. And I hope they're successful in getting there. But they can avoid huge amount of carbon emissions from their manufacturing processes, let alone the carbon emission reductions by just putting electric powered cars and trucks out there. Ford, not to be outdone again, they're spending $11 billion right now on EVs through the next 3 or 4 years. They are using, they say they're going to go to all renewable energy by 2035. So it'll be interesting to see if whether they now that GM has come out with 2025, whether they try to speed that up or not. But again, they are online to make things happen. And I don't know if you're a car buffs and you love power cars, that E-Mustang is crazy powerful. Here's the game changer for me. Powertrain costs. So an efficient fossil fuel powered car, this is the projected cost increase over the next 10 to 20, 15 years. Here's what the projection is for mainstream battery electric cars. So those costs, as you saw, are coming down. So in the next year to 2 years, the cost of mainstream battery electric cars is going to be less than fossil fuel powered cars. To me, that's going to be a paradigm shift, because when people see that I can buy a electric car for less than I can buy a fossil fuel car from, it's a game changer. So we're looking for that to happen in the next couple of years. So that'll be awesome. So I throw this slide in there because of the irony of it. I love this slide. This is the Kentucky Coal Mining Museum, and they installed solar panels on their roof because they think they can save $8,000 to $10,000 a year in energy costs. So hey, more power to them. And so I conclude this segment by saying, yeah, if they can change, so can we. So can we change? Yeah, the technology is there. There's no question that we have the ability to change and move to a fossil-free future. The question now is, will we? Okay, so let's talk about that. So in 2015, the US and every other country in the world signed the Paris Agreement that we'd work together to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century. The US got pulled out by the prior administration, and the new administration, the Biden administration, put us back in again right afterwards. It's important because the rest of the world looks up to us in terms of how we do this. So I think it was huge, and it's huge for the planet. Okay. So the question then becomes, well, what about China and India? That always comes up. And people say China, India pollute more than we do. Well, actually, China does these days in total emissions, although on a per person basis, they don't. They just have a lot more people and they emit a lot more. But look at historically, the US has, how many gigatons of CO2 the US has put up versus China. Now, today, yes, China on a year-to-year basis, but they'll never catch us. And I don't think anybody will ever catch the US in terms of how much carbon dioxide we put up in the atmosphere. Now, do we see any trends? Because you've read that, China says, well, we're not going to get to, zero emissions until 2070. We're going to continue to build fossil fuel, coal-fired plants until 2030. But if you look at the new capacity, 52% was wind and solar. In fact, about 60% was renewable or clean energy. Let me put it that way. About 60% was clean. So this is still a prodigious amount of coal that they're using. No question about it. But the trend, I like the trend. I like the trend that's going in the right direction. My second favorite slide is this one. This is a large solar farm in China. And you can obviously only see this from the air, but I just think it's kind of cool. India, same story. They use a prodigious amount of coal, but the trend is in new capacity being built, more wind and solar are being built than new coal plants. So this is, again, a very positive sign. Over 60% is clean energy. We want to see that get even more. How about Europe? Well, Europe has been running away with this game for a long time. 88% of new capacity in Europe was from wind and solar. So they are by far leading the way. How about the United States? you might be surprised to see that 70% of new capacity in 2019 was from wind and solar. Okay, they're basically most of the rest was natural gas, and you see no coal. Okay, we have not built a new coal plant for a long time because, as I said, gas is cheaper. In the next couple of years, the US is expected to retire another 19 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity. So that's huge. And at the same time, they're going to build 197 gigawatts of solar and wind. So you can see this shift happening even more in the next few years. My computer is giving me a little trouble here. People talk about jobs and, oh, people are going to lose jobs. Actually, the two fastest growing occupations in the United States, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is solar panel installers and wind turbine technicians. So there's going to be a lot more jobs available. Obviously, there's an issue with retraining people, but jobs are going to be there. 300 global companies have made the decision to go 100% renewable. That's huge. And I, as a business person, I look at business and I look at big money and I say, well, where are they looking? Because that's the direction I think the world is going to take. So 300 of the major companies in the world are committing to go 100% renewable. In 2018, California, which, as you probably know, if you look at California all by itself, is the 5th largest economy in the world. Okay, and we've passed legislation saying that by 2045, 100% of the state's electricity is going to be carbon free. Now that's a huge commitment, and it will be carbon neutral by that time as well. So that's a huge commitment, and I sure as heck hope that we make it. How about big money? This is kind of my bailiwick, but I look at BlackRock. BlackRock takes a lot of flack for investing in fossil fuel industry, but BlackRock, which manages $6 trillion in assets, issued a climate risk warning to their investors. They're saying, hey, look, the market is underpricing climate risk, which means they're overvaluing your stock in your portfolios. And so they're telling their people to be careful, on their investments in terms of their investments in fossil fuel. The important point here is that BlackRock is recognizing the reality of climate change. And they're saying it's real and you need to take it into consideration. On BlackRock's side, they helped elect 2 pro-climate board members to Exxon. And I thought that was awesome. And I think all the other big oil companies have to start taking notice of that one, because BlackRock is big enough and holds enough stock in Exxon to make that happen. So that's actually a positive side to that. How about the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve is already in considering climate change risk on long-term monetary policy decisions. In fact, they're saying climate change is a major factor in deciding whether to raise or lower long-term interest rates, because if you look at the size, the number and the dollar amount of weather and climate disasters, it's huge. And this would have, $1.7 trillion would have a significant effect on our economy in the future. So they're already taking that into consideration. And of course, the Biden administration is working not as well as some of us would like, but are working to try to create new legislation that will help fix the climate situation. So the point here is that this is no longer a side issue. It's a mainstream issue, and everybody is finally starting to face up to it, which is, to me, is a positive sign. Even philanthropy is moving in the right direction. A record $5 billion was donated to protect nature in the last year. The World Economic Forum reported a trillion tree initiative, planting 1 trillion trees. It's just sponsored by Benioff is I believe is the CEO of Salesforce. Anyway, he's kind of leading that initiative to restore forests worldwide. That's exactly what we need. So remember I talked about deforestation. Well, here's the other side of it, reforestation. All right, I want to end this segment with COP26, which just ended this last week. Good news and bad news. So I'll talk about the good news first. 105 nations are representing 85% of the Earth's forests agreed to reverse deforestation, not stop it, but reverse it. So, and that's huge news because Brazil, which is the Amazon rainforest, and Congo, which is the second largest rainforest, and Indonesia, which is the third largest rainforest, are all in there. And of course, Russia has probably the largest overall forest in Siberia of all. So they're all in there saying, hey, we're going to reverse deforestation. They've all signed up. Hopefully they do it, right? And this is supposed to happen by 2030. 100 nations also pledged to cut methane emissions by 30%. We'd love to see more, but at least it's moving in the right direction. John Kerry made a statement that the UN will end subsidies in the United States for oil and gas. That's huge. Remember, I talked about the size of the subsidies. To me, that, and let the markets do what markets do, which is reward the good products, and the bad products go away. And so I think this is going to be huge. I hope he really makes that happen. Also, the US and China on a side agreement decided to work together to accelerate emission reductions. So China had pledged, that they would become, zero emissions by 2070. So the fact that they're willing to talk to us because they recognize this is a common problem. This isn't something we fight over like everything else. This is something that's a common problem to everybody. And they're agreeing that let's sit down and talk and see if we can figure this out, because it's affecting us all. The other benefit is that instead of every 5 years, which is what the Paris Agreement called for, re-upping your emission plans, they decided that they would re-up their emission plans next year. So they're not going to wait for 5 years. They're going to do it next year. So that'll be interesting to see what happens at COP27 in Egypt. One of the things they talked about, one of the things they wanted to do was basically say, okay, we're going to eliminate coal and fossil fuel, period. That got watered down. And again, that the huge climate lobby, which I'll talk about, fossil fuel lobby was a big part of this, but they watered it down to unabated coal and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. So that leaves you a lot of wiggle room, right, to keep burning fossil fuels. Why did that happen? Well, look at the bottom here. 500 lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry, the largest single contingent at COP26 were lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry. So you wonder why the results were not so good and why people are not happy. Right now, I talked about, 1.5 degree was the Paris Agreement limiting the 1.5 Celsius. Right now, if we don't do anything, we're headed for a 2.7 degrees Celsius increase. So that's unsustainable. COP26, if we do everything that they've agreed to right now, would reduce it to about a 2.0 increase, but that's still way above the 1.5 goal. And remember, 1.5 is higher than we are today. So 1.5 is still doable according to the folks that came out of COP26, but it doesn't look likely. Because you got countries like India committing to net zero by 2070. Now I can understand because they're still developing, and so they're saying, hey, why should we, look at all the pollution the U.S. has put up there. Why do we have to suffer and our people have to suffer? I can see their point, but this is not going to help us, right? And the same thing with China, 2060, way too late to stop what we need to stop by roughly 2030. So these are problems and not good news at all. Also, some of the developing countries who are suffering the consequences of global warming, like rising sea and that kind of thing, we're hoping that they would vote for, that there would be an agreement for compensation from the richer companies to help them deal with the issues they're suffering from. And that did not happen. Like I say, the language weakened in the final agreement relative to eliminating fossil fuels. And, as far as I'm concerned, the lobbyists in the fossil fuel industry won that debate. Okay, enough of that stuff. What can you do as individuals? Well, first of all, you can go solar and you can drive electric. So this handsome gentleman here that you see proudly showing off his Tesla Model 3. This is the best car I've ever owned. I'm just really thrilled by the performance, and and hopefully these cars will start to get cheaper in the near term, and more people can take advantage of them. This is the roof of my house. I have 17 solar panels up there. that are powering not only my house, but the car and everything else I do, plus a little bit. Right now you can get a 26% tax credit. So, if you spend $20,000 on a solar array like I did, you can get, about $5,200 back as a tax credit. It's not a deduction, it's a credit. So that's money back in your pocket again. So it significantly reduces your out-of-pocket cost and increases your rate of return and the amount of time it'll take you to recover your investment. So solar, there's never been a better time to take a look at putting solar on your roof. Now, if you can't afford a new car or a solar on your roof, here's something that every one of you can do right now. If you live in San Jose, then you're under the community choice energy group called San Jose Clean Energy. You live outside of San Jose, anywhere in Silicon Valley, you're under Silicon Valley Clean Energy. I don't know about San Diego, but you can look into community choice energy and see if there are those organizations. What they do is they report directly to the city and they buy your energy. They buy clean energy. So, and then they provide that to PG&E and it goes into the grid. So if you say, I want 100% clean energy, so if you go online and SJCE, San Jose Clean Energy.org, or SVCE, San Jose Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and say, and they'll give you an option up to 100% renewable. Choose that one. And all you need is your PG&E account number, and they will make that happen instantaneously. I've been on this program now for probably close to 3 years now. And I've had, clean renewable energy delivered to my door. So what they're basically committing to do is to satisfy the demand for clean energy. They'll buy that much clean energy and put it into the grid. Right now, you're getting roughly 50-50 from PG&E, about half renewable and about half, fossil fuel. So I would highly suggest that you all can take this one particular action and upgrade to clean renewable energy. What else can you do? Vote. In the last presidential election, we voted pro-climate and we won. I mean, we really mobilized. And I think that's what we need to continue to do, is to look at laws and legislation and legislators and vote for those who are pro-climate. We need to just keep the pressure on. So voting is probably one of the key things you can do. Educate yourselves on what's going on. So this particular film by Leonardo DiCaprio, Ice on Fire, has a lot of interesting technology for you engineers and technology buffs on how we can pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. So that might be an interesting one to watch. And then Woody Harrelson narrates this video, Kiss the Ground, which talks about regenerative agriculture, which basically is all about leaving CO2 in the ground where it nourishes plants and not releasing it back up into the atmosphere, which is what you get when you till the soil. So it's called no-till agriculture, and it really has a lot of possibilities of keeping CO2 sequestered in the ground where it belongs. Other things you can do, become an activist. It's not time to be shy. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. You pass this particular video around with this talk, but we need to spread the word. People need to understand what the problem is from a scientific standpoint and take action. If you can engage in conversations, if you can engage in demonstrations, by all means do so. Electrifying your home, so going all electric, getting rid of gas. Gas is a terrible thing to have, natural gas in your house, because when you burn it, it releases carbon monoxide as well as CO2, and carbon monoxide could be very harmful. This is why hopefully you all have carbon monoxide detectors in your house to make sure that you're not breathing any of that. But when you replace your heating and ventilating system, or like I just replaced my hot water heater with a heat pump, it's all electric. And, so I've gotten rid of my gas water heater. I just replaced my gas dryer with an electric gas dryer. So an electric dryer. And so, so we're moving in that direction. I think we just have a couple more, like our stovetop still has gas, and that's the next thing to go. So anyway, we're really moving in that direction from a lot of reasons, not just from a health standpoint, as well as, and by the way, if you're using a gas stovetop, please turn on your vent, because that will suck out all those noxious gases. The other thing you can do about educating yourself is join an organization. There's a lot of them out there, like 350.org or Sierra Club, Climate Reality, which is what we belong to, You heard just in the last month, I guess, Citizens Climate Lobby talked to you. And of course, Elders Climate Action, which is where I got started. But the benefit of these organizations is that they will send you information and keep you up to date on what's going on and what the truth is regarding, and they also send you actions you can take. So like 350.org is great for sending, saying, hey, there's this bill we want, that's related to the climate. We'd like your help in passing it. Please email your legislators. And then you just do one click on the button and it automatically emails your information to your legislator. And it's amazing because, I get a lot of responses back saying, hey, thanks for your comments, but it's that easy. So, they really do help you become an activist. Writing letters to editors, if you're a good writer, that would be kind of fun to do. I got one published once, not easy. But emailing state and federal representatives, like kind of what I was just talking about, they count every response they get. And I get letters back from Zoe Lofgren, I get letters back from Dianne Feinstein, I get letters back saying, hey, thanks, Bill, for your comment about whatever issue it is. I did the one click on and sent that email to them. And so, it really works. And, they count all this as part of, hey, here's what my constituents want me to do. So please do that and get your voice heard and felt by your representatives. Again, talk to friends and relatives, keep yourself informed, do your own research. Don't listen to hearsay. Some of the news media, will tell you stuff that, might make for sensational news, but it might not necessarily be scientific fact. So do your own research on this stuff. I do. And actually what I did was I started issuing a weekly climate newsletter to all my friends and relatives. And just, and it keeps me up to date because I look at, what's the news of the week from a climate standpoint. This is my email address, Marn-Yee. If you put that in the chat, if anybody wants to get on my list, it's only my list. It doesn't go anywhere. I don't ask for money. It's one of the better lists you can get on. But what I do is I keep you up to date on what's happening, in climate. So in conclusion, if we sit back and just think about what would the world look like if we actually did something? How about less smoggy days and dropping out those 9 million deaths a year? Or how about fewer devastating fires so that we don't have years like 2020? Or milder weather events worldwide. Last year was the worst ever for hurricanes. How do we fix that? We can if we take the action we need to take. Reduced immigration. If the world is, we don't have droughts, people can live where they've always lived. But right now, that's not the case. More abundant and healthier food. Wouldn't that be nice? Food that's not sapped of its nutrients by drought. Improved health, improved biodiversity, stop this mass extinction that's going on. So improve biodiversity and a safe and healthy future for our children and our grandchildren and us. I plan on being around for a few more years. I hope you do too. So use your voice, use your vote, use your choices, and speak truth to power like your world depends on it. Because your world depends on it. Okay, thank you all. I am going to stop sharing and we can open this up to questions. So Marn-Yee, do you have some that?
Yeah, so if you can raise your hand if you have a question, or raise your hand like physically or with that icon thing, yeah. Or you can type it into the chat if you prefer me to read it out. So Bill, right now there's no pending question in there. It was more some comments from, I think, Assyrian Democrat. I forgot who that is.
That's me. That's Tony.
Yes. Hi, Tony. Yeah. He was commenting the first part was very stressful to listen to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he was surprised by the big subsidy. And also, again, these little known facts. And that's why, we need to, address those and make them public so people know. One fact I just learned, well, I'm assuming it's a fact now, but a group called Veterans for Peace, is saying that military around the world don't have to report their greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm like, what? They're like, one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world, and they don't have to report. I just find that incomprehensible. And so I'm going to do some more research on that. But wow, that would be anyway. Bani, is that how you
Bonnie,
pronounce it?
hey
Ani.
Bill, yeah, hi, thank you for that presentation. Actually, that was the comment that I was going to have because of the COP26. I was looking at some of this stuff, and exactly the United States military, which is a huge producer of greenhouse gases, is excluded from
Yeah.
any of that, which was interesting.
Yeah, all the military though, not just the U.S., China,
Okay.
all the rest of them, they're all excluded. So it's not just us, but and I just said this information needs to be made public because
Sure. And then, Bill, I was remembering looking at that powertrain. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I mean, it was great. But your powertrain cost consumption slide that you had, those, I mean, it started with like 5,000, which was like the lowest. Like, I was wondering, like, what kind of a car are we thinking about? I mean, the range of those car prices were like 5,000 to 15,000.
That's not the cost of the car, Bonnie. That's the cost of the powertrain, the engine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So those were not car costs. I was like,
Right.
kind of-
Yeah. And so the thing is that, assuming all the other parts of the car, the tires, the rest of it are kind of standard.
Got it.
The powertrain is the big differentiator there. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the biggest single cost factor in a
Okay.
car. Yeah.
Okay. So you're just saying, yeah, the engine costs are considerably lower.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Very nice. Thank you for all the stats and numbers. It was great.
You're welcome, Bonnie. Yeah. Walter. You're muted, Walter.
All right. So it's kind of a comment and observation. I've always been very interested in. Recently, I started looking. I mean, you could be, if you haven't looked into this environment, climate, you think, oh, well, it's been going on for many years, and what's the big deal? But once you start looking into it, it takes very little to realize we're really almost doomed. And so the issue I see is not so much, who's doing what. I mean, majority of the base CO2 comes from household consumption, etc. And so that plays a big part in terms of reducing it. And what you suggested, all of those things help. But I think the biggest problem is that there isn't a viable alternative. So it's like, I wrote a little article, and it's like deciding to become a vegetarian overnight, and then waking up in the morning and have no idea how to do, vegetarian food with that kind of nourishes you. So previous kind of cut down on oil here and coal, and Europe kind of backfired because now Europe is having to, so no, it was China with coal, they kind of go back to using more coal. We're asking Middle East to pump more oil, and Europe is buying gas from Russia. So this was basically, they planned to cut down, but there were no plans to expand. And so the reason for this, for the big money that's kind of supporting the fossil fuel, it was the only energy we knew, and it supports economies, right? So we still need that. We need that. And so although it's poisoning us, we still need it to kind of continue with our economies. You can't shut it down. You have to have a viable, strong energy on the side. And so we've just started basically with Biden's climate deal. I mean, up to now, we're just dabbling at this thing. And so, that's where I think that we haven't done enough.
I totally agree with you. And you can't just shut it off. I totally agree with that. There has to be an orderly transition, because especially, countries like India, they don't have the ability to build solar. I mean, they're building solar, by the way. In fact, they have one of the largest solar arrays in the world. But they can't transition. They can't pull their economy up and their standard of living up for their people without coal. It just won't happen. And so
you can't do it. I mean, we can't do it here either.
And so we see that, we recognize that, the question is, how do we help them? The richer nations like the US, like China, we're the ones who put the most CO2 up in the atmosphere. period. We're responsible for all that. I think we have a responsibility to help fix that.
So the question I have, from the industry, big industry of fossil fuel, any of them are sort of thinking kind of smartly to kind of convert, or are they sort of like driving themselves to the edge of the cliff? Because I mean, ultimately, you know, the green energy will sort of rise up. And so the industry that exists currently is fossil fuel. And as giant as it is any of it doing anything to kind of diverse into, you know, green energy?
Yeah, I think I showed you the charts that show that the trend for new energy installations in China, in India, in the US, and in Europe all show a trend towards more clean energy.
But that's new energy. I'm talking about existing, like, I don't know, Chevron, Shell, Exxon, BP, all those.
Yeah, good question. BP 20 years ago decided to change their name from British Petroleum to Beyond Petroleum. And I thought that was a big joke because, you know, they still haven't done it, you know, so they haven't earned that name yet.
If they have green color.
Yeah, exactly. Green color and BP theoretically standing for Beyond Petroleum. I'm waiting for one of those big companies to bite the bullet and say, look, here's where the future is. The future is in clean energy.
Right.
And we need, you know, we want to be the provider of choice of energy, period. And to move significantly into the direction of clean, that has to happen. One of those companies has to make that move. And once they do, then the others will follow. I think long-term, it's going to happen. You know, you see, you know, car manufacturers, you see businesses, you see, you know, countries making commitments to go, and it's all going to happen in the next 50 years. The problem that I see is that soon enough to avert a climate disaster? That's the issue.
So Bill, can I quickly chime in? And then we have Tony and then Suzanne.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say, Walter, to your point, that I think this transition to clean energy, it's really a big transformation of our energy infrastructure, and it is going to be painful. Mm-hmm. We are seeing that in China, Europe, as you're saying, and I don't fully understand, you know, like the why and what still needs to be built out and what can be built out in the short term, medium term, or long term, with or without like the support, right? Like in America, we're so paralyzed. Like there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be upgraded and changed as we move towards renewable energy. It's just a different animal.
Right, so, but right now, I mean, the solar and wind energy is really cheap, but storage energy is very expensive. So basically, we come to a halt. We can't produce more solar and wind because the storage is too expensive.
Yeah, and the grid also has to change. But anyway, I don't want us to run out of time. That's a really deep topic. We can maybe invite even another speaker to talk to you guys. Yeah. So Tony, you're next.
So, I mean, first of all, my takeaway from this presentation is that we really then need to be activists and get involved, because we cannot really afford to kind of push back, get some other, you know, climate denier politicians controlling our White House or the Congress. But okay, coming back to you said that John Kerry has committed the US will kind of stop subsidies for, is that even practical in the US? You know, kind of we already are kind of on borderline to kind of, in 2 years, maybe we'll be pushed back in the Congress, right? I mean, is that even possible? Isn't it politically feasible to do this in the US?
You know, the fossil fuel industry has such a huge lobby. You know, you saw what they did in Glasgow. You know, they're going to fight that tooth and nail here in this country. So, yeah, you have to hope that they have the political clout to make that happen. But, you know, again, it's you know, the fossil fuel industry is great at creating doubt. And their whole objective is to get us to do nothing. If they can get us to do nothing, if they can raise enough doubt that people just kind of sit back and say, they've won. Okay, they've won. And they can continue to sell their products and make a lot of money. So that's why we can't sit back, any of us, and not take action. we have to do something that's positive in the right direction, or else, it's, I don't know if you ever heard that analogy of a frog that was sitting in a bowl of water and they kept heating the water and the frog just sat there and sat there and sat there until he boiled to death because he never noticed the temperature was increasing. And I kind of use that analogy because that's what's happening right here, right now on this planet. And by the way, the planet will survive just fine. It's human beings that are not going to survive. And that's what I'm worried about. Human beings and a lot of the animals and plants that are coexisting with us. But the planet doesn't need us, as it's demonstrating with COVID and some other things that are going on.
Exactly.
Okay, I've taken up a lot of your time. Is that if there's
We
any
have one more
I'd be
question.
happy to stay, or
We have one more question from Suzanne. Sorry if I got your name wrong.
That's okay. Hi, my name is Susan Mantegis. Thank you for the presentation. I'm sorry I joined a bit late, but I do have an issue with solar energy because there has been so much emphasis on pushing consumers to use solar, and there are not much discussion of what is the future of solar. As you, I'm sure, pretty well know that the life expectancy for a lot of these solar panels are between 30 to 40 years. So when they are useless and they're not working, where we are going to be dumping this toxic, horrible, hazardous that would leak to our water, to the earth, to everything, and you can't even do anything about maintaining it. I don't know what we're going to do with it. So, and then there's not much talk about, hey, we have to also focus on other type of fixing our infrastructure so we can cut or reduce our gas and oil usage. So why there is not much discussion about that? Why there is not much talk about, we have to also think about what the future of solar are going to be. Batteries are one of the most toxic manufacturing, and when it's end of their life, they're absolutely toxic. So what we are being sold as consumer is also falsehood, because they're telling us stuff that it's not really going to be good for environment in 30 years. We're talking about now.
Yeah. So Suzanne, let me answer your question if I can. What you bring out are very real concerns. And you're right, there's not a lot of discussion about it, which I'm surprised, because there's a lot of technologies out there that are available to deal with it. Right now, today, the technology exists to recycle roughly 95% of the materials in a solar panel. And that's only going to get better over time. In 30 or 40 years, the technology is going to be that much better. And so we have time in our favor. But right now, that is totally recycled. And there are companies also that are being created that take used batteries and recycle them and repurpose them. So the technology is coming. If everybody threw away all their batteries today, we'd be screwed, right? I mean, it would be a disaster. But we have time on our side and technology on our side that's going to help with those two problems. I feel like you're right. We just don't. There's not enough talk about it. There's not enough information about, hey, this is happening. And thank you for bringing it up, because I'm going to include it in my presentation the next time out on what's happening, because that is a real concern for people. And I thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anything else?
If there is no question, I guess can wrap up the meeting. I am stopping the recording. We can just have an open discussion maybe for 15 minutes with our group. And Bill, if you guys are welcome to stay, or you guys can leave.
Marn-Yee, thank